Within the next few moments, I will analyze the artistic production of two African American artists, Elizabeth Catlett and John Wilson. Special emphasis will be placed upon two specific creations, one produced by each of the previously mentioned artists entitled Mother and Child. Before making this comparison, it is necessary to denote the connection between African American art and also to discuss the particular aesthetic used in the creation of this art. After making this connection, I will use this aesthetic as a primer to deduce meaning from these two works of art, laying a foundation for discussing the possibilities of the type of consciousness they have the possibility to produce in the viewer.
Hello, I am Anthony Neal, a student at Clark Atlanta University in the Department of Humanities. I am currently studying for the degree of Doctorate of Arts in the Humanities with a concentration in African American Studies. During my tenure as a student, I have centered my readings around the areas of African American religion and philosophy, political philosophy, and aesthetics. Stop it. When we look at the early identification of African Americans involved in the visual arts, we see a small cadre of artists closely aligned to the production of works in the strict tradition of European or English classicism. The rules were clearly defined for the artist, and cultural expression was not the acceptable standard for visual creations produced by early African Americans. Those two African Americans had to sublimate their expression and stick closely to what was defined as art. Therefore, it was not a surprise to see the first African American artists defined as slave artists, with skills as iron workers, cabinet makers, quilt makers, even silversmiths, and stoneware vessel makers. The majority of these artists were using their Afrocentric talents for creating useful items needed by their masters or for their own households when allowed. The African Americans' talents as visual artists were later identified as painters of white family portraits, and in rare cases, portrait painters of well-to-do free persons of color. These early African American artists enjoyed a degree of status, and many brought their freedom using their artistic talents as an acceptable barter. Having a marketable and acceptable skill pleased the white clientele and provided a living for the early African American visual artists. The African American artists were gaining respect in Europe. They also longed for a better connection to their work and experiences as American artists. That break came in the early 1920s. The movement was called Negro or Harlem Renaissance. This resurgence of literature, knowledge, and the arts coming out of New York was powerful. A fertile and acceptable door had been opened to African American musicians, writers, poets, intellectuals, entrepreneurs, and visual artists. The opportunity was now available to grow and show off their best talents. From 1919 to about 1929, Harlem, New York became the capital of the cultural activities for African Americans. This period in American history was extremely uplifting to African Americans as a people. Personalities and individuals connected their expressions in writing, music, and visual artworks as they related to the political, social, and economic conditions of being black in America. Many black art critics soon grew disillusioned with the particular aesthetic philosophy espoused during the 1930s and 1940s. James Porter, a junior colleague and fellow faculty member at Howard University, along with Alain Locke, was ideologically at odds over the nature and meaning of black creativity. Porter saw a fundamental split between his answer and his senior colleagues to the twofold question: what may constitute a distinctive contribution by the American Negro artist to American culture, and could it have been made prior to the advent of the so-called Negro Renaissance? In his 1937 review of Alain Locke's Negro Art, Past and Present, a succinct survey directed at the general reader, Porter had harshly criticized his colleague both for looking for black cultural distinctiveness in the arts and artifacts of 18th and 19th century creators, and for encouraging contemporary African American artists to look at traditional African art for inspiration. Within the pages of Artfront, the organ of the Artists' Union, Porter wrote in his review, "The Negro artist and racial bias that the work of early painters and sculptors of African descent should be studied for its artistic distinction, not for its cultural distinctiveness." And concerning contemporary art, Porter declared that if African American artists simply adopted African forms, they would give birth to sterile art. Anxious that Locke was making what he saw as a perilous connection between race, culture, and creativity, Porter stressed that the individual and environmental factors would and should determine the nature of real contributions to American culture. For 4 years after James Porter outlined what he saw as the key problems facing the historian of art by African Americans, Romare Bearden identified what he saw as the critical problems facing the African American artist. In 1946, from his vantage point as a promising emerging artist, defined what he saw as the Negro artist dilemma in Critique, a review of contemporary art. Labeling fine artists of African descent as latecomers into the visual art in America, Bearden proffered that it was not until the 20s that the Negro entered the various fields of art in any substantial numbers. Yet since their entry into the fine arts 2 decades ago, the painter charged they had been unduly burdened by a set of assumptions and practices created and enforced by critics, curators, collectors, and connoisseurs that had circumscribed both their art and their actions. Characterizing these burdensome assumptions, Bearden stated in considering critical opinion in relation to the Negro artist, "I have observed 3 major concepts that constantly reappear. Number 1, the Negro should continue or at least simulate the traditions of African art. Number 2, the Negro artist should attempt a unique nationalistic social expression closely akin in feeling to jazz music and the spiritual. Number 3, the Negro's art should be visual and trenchant reflection of his political and social aspirations, especially as it would focus attention on the exigency of his existence. Many accept that it was writing like these, which led to the Black Arts Movement. The precursors to what is now called the Black Arts Movement are many and interwoven. This was a movement that lasted between 1962 and 1971. One could reasonably argue that there had been a call for a separate black letters in the American literary mainstream since Frederick Douglass's What the Negro Wants in 1868. But the literary events that took place in the 1960s, influenced by social events from the 1950s and the 1960s, overshadowed all work in black letters that had gone on before. Malcolm X's assassination on February 21st, 1965 in Harlem's Audubon Ballroom typically marks the official beginning of the Black Arts Movement, the cultural corollary of the Black Power movement. The Black Arts Movement, usually referred to as a 60s movement, coalesced in 1965 and broke apart around 1975 and 1976. Many artists who did not directly claim a presence in the Black Arts Movement also drew boldly from African American culture and history for the form and content of their work, and hotly debated the role of the artist, the purpose of art, and the notion of black aesthetic was de rigueur during the age of dissent. Two such artists were Elizabeth Catlett and John Wilson.
Elizabeth Catlett was born in Washington, D.C. on April 15, 1915. Her father, a mathematics teacher at Tuskegee Institute in Alabama, died several months before she was born. He was also an artist, and his drawings and relief carvings inspired Catlett to pursue art. Art was her favorite class, and she decided to become an artist while still in high school. Her mother worked as a truant officer in Washington's public schools to support her three children. Three of Catlett's grandparents were slaves, and she was raised by her mother and maternal grandmother. She was surrounded by strong female role models who inspired her to champion women, especially African American and later Mexican women. She attended Lucretia Mott Elementary School, Dunbar High School, and then Howard University, where she graduated cum laude. She aspired to go to the Carnegie Institute, but was denied access because she was African American. As a result, she became the first graduate student with the MFA, Masters of Fine Arts in Sculpture, from the University of Iowa in 1940. It was there that she was afforded the opportunity to study under the direction of American landscape painter Grant Wood, who stressed the importance of mastering disciplines by working with subjects they knew best. She also studied at several prominent schools in the Northeast, such as the Art Institute of Chicago, where she studied ceramics, and at the Arts Student League in New York for lithography. Inspired by Grant Wood's distinctive directive, Elizabeth chose to create art about the black experience. The span of her works provide a primary glimpse into the lives of African Americans during pivotal moments in history and deal with such stark subjects as social injustice and the human condition. Her art also intimately addresses her life as an African American woman and mother. The styles of Elizabeth Catlett's works can be divided into the subcategories of drawing and therefore printmaking and sculpture. The artist's printmaking style, exhibited in woodcuts, linoleum, prints, and lithography, largely abides by the social realist school of American art from the 1930s and 1940s. In the woodcuts and linoleum prints, objective depictions of figures and scenes are described with hard-edged forms in graphically rendered volumes. Forms are made to appear three-dimensional by virtue of thickly hatched lines that are typically ordered in progressive fashion. Implied lines that often function first as outlines around forms of special focus also give a great sense of movement to a given work. The eye is guided to travel through the piece in dominant sweeping directions of horizontal, vertical, and diagonal paths. The use of color is typically relegated to black, plus one or two other colors that may describe skin color or the hue of another form. And such colors are harmoniously neutralized, appearing more organic than synthetic in origin. John Wilson is very interesting as an artist in the fact that he has the ability to not only express himself artistically, but also to do so verbally. He was born in Boston, Massachusetts in 1922, educated at Roxbury Memorial High School, and was a scholarship student at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts for 5 years. His parents, Reginald and Violet Wilson, came up from what is now, or what was then, the British Guiana. Wilson was never discouraged by his parents in what he wanted to do. He was never allowed to think that he was less than equal to the situation. Instead, he was given the idea that if he was doing something that is effective, then he would be recognized as successful. There were no examples of black artists for young Wilson. The idea of doing things on pieces of paper or canvas that would have some importance or might be recognized was not considered practical. However, Wilson got involved with the art program at the Roxbury Boys Club, and he started winning prizes at various Roxbury Boys Club art exhibits. His father was absolutely encouraging. One thing led to another, and Wilson got into the Boston Museum School through this art program at the Roxbury Boys Club. As a black person, Wilson didn't see great works that reflected what he had been experiencing in America. Wilson wanted to document his particular reality somehow. He couldn't escape the fact that whatever happened to him had an awful lot to do with his being black. This was in 1944, and a show of Mexican artists came to Boston. Wilson fell in love with Orozco, who did powerful kinds of paintings about revolutionary events and people who were trying to change the world we live in. Charles White, who was married to Elizabeth Catlett, happened to be on the jury when Wilson won his first prize for an oil painting. They later met in Boston. They also studied together in Mexico with Mexican artists. This can be seen in many of the subject matter chosen by Wilson, which was also the same and sometimes very similar to that which was chosen by Elizabeth Catlett. The kind of form that Wilson's art took was always very three-dimensional. Two-dimensional shapes and patterns were never a strong part of his style. The forms in Wilson's two-dimensional things displaced space and suggested weight and solidity. Wilson's strong interest in the human condition and his extraordinary feeling for dark tonalities and sculptural effects are revealed in figural images of African American life. Parents and children portrayed in loving protective poses suggested universal values are also a recurring theme. The oversized hands and large-scale, solidly modeled, yet slightly abstracted figure of the woman in Mother and Child reveal Wilson's training with the Parisian modernist painter Ferdinand Lecoeur. In the 1940s, also evident is the impact of Wilson's experience in the early 1950s during a fellowship in Mexico City, where he was attracted to the powerful imagery of Mexican muralists like Diego Rivera. The subject matter of Mother and Child was not a novel idea even in 1952 when the two works were created. In fact, a case could be made that the subject matter first appeared as a work of art as early as the Middle Kingdom in the form of Isis holding and nursing Horus. Christians later used this image and used it as a model for paintings of Mary holding Jesus as a baby. Black Madonna images began to appear in the mid to late medieval periods. Paintings depicting the Madonna image as white appeared around the 16th century. When those works are compared to the works created by Catlett and Wilson, a distinct difference can be seen in the manner in which the child is being held. In the earlier mother and child images, the child is being presented to the world as if to show the value in the image of the mother and child. In the creations of Catlett and Wilson, the child is being protected from the world, almost hidden, as if to say the only safety for the child, the black child that is in the mother's arms.